So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome you to the fourth and final session of our first ever Illicit Trade Forum, and I can honestly say that this is going to be my favorite session, not surprisingly because I'm on a panel with some of my favorite people who happen to be member companies of TRACIT. And the reason that they're amongst my favorite people is that we all have a common mission and a common belief, and that is the fact that illicit trade in any of the products that these companies are, sectors of these companies are working in, we have the common belief that illicit trade, stopping illicit trade, is a social and an economic imperative. So all the companies that are here and those that are also in the audience are committed to that, and that's why we are here offering to work with the UNCTAD. And as important as working with the organization is working with the member states of UNCTAD. And so the first three sessions, as you know, have been oriented toward understanding the size and the shape of the problem, what tools are available, and ultimately how we can help you fight illicit trade. This session is going to take the discussion into the business sector. Each of these companies, each of these representatives work in sectors that sell legal products, clean, legal, properly produced, legally sourced products. The problem that we have together is that there are also illicit versions of these products. And in introducing the first speaker, John Blood, who has a very important title here, Chief Legal and Corporate Affairs at Anheuser-Busch InBev. In introducing him, he's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. There is illicit trade of all forms of alcohol in pretty much every country in the world. There are beer, there are spirits. In this case of beer, there's less of a prevalence of illicit trade in beer than in spirits. But this company is committed to the fact that no illicit trade should be in their sector. They're proud of their products. They're proud of their competitors' products. They're happy to compete on a fair and legal basis, but not with illicits and not with illegal products and products that can harm their own consumers. So I'm going to be really pleased to introduce John, and I will introduce the others more deeply, but just before we get started, to my right is Stanislas Barro from Novartis, and to my left is Iris van der Weken from the Responsible Jewelry Council, and she's proudly here representing Richemont, who's one of our member companies. And then last but not least to the left is Laurent Geisendanner from Syngenta. So we have a terrific panel lined up for you. I can assure you you're going to learn a lot about what these companies are facing and get a chance to hear some of the real life solutions that these people are delivering in your countries. So with that, I would like to introduce John, and he's got a slideshow, and pay attention. Here we go.
Jeff, thank you. And let me thank UNCTAD for inviting me here to share how our work on tackling illicit trade is helping to contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN. I'd also like to thank TRACIT. It's been an important ally of ours, and it's wonderful to work with partners who share the belief that this is a big problem, and this is also a problem that together we can make a contribution to. So thank you. And also, thank you to the team here for arranging this, and also it's a privilege to be in front of so many members here, and I look forward to having a conversation as well in the Q&A. Let's see. All right, thank you. So illicit alcohol is a serious threat in many countries, with harmful impacts on consumers, safety, security, employment, and tax revenue. That list alone, if it was just one of them, if it was two of them, but to put them all together, we start to see that this is a shared effort. But more importantly, it's an effort that no one person's going to solve. Only together can we make the resolution a reality. There's alarming consequences from illicit trade in alcohol. They're especially evident in developing countries. In AB InBev, we have a lot of our business in developing countries. More than half of our revenue comes from developing countries. While this issue isn't just in developing countries, it's something where we can see when we look at the data how prevalent it is. So today, I'd like to share with you some simple definitions. When we're talking about illicit trade, what does that mean? I'd like to also share with you some data, right? Because it's one of those things that we all know. Man, there's something not right here. We see the illicit. We have anecdotal evidence. We can see various, you go into the store, you can see it, that's not right. But what does the data show us? So we'll share with you some data as well. We'll also talk a little bit about, can we get to the root cause? What are the drivers? What are the enablers to this issue? And then we'll talk about some case studies. What is being done? What are the lessons we can draw from that? Are they scalable? Are they applicable only to that city, only to that town, only to that country? Or are there lessons that we can derive from them in other countries, in other continents, and in other areas? And finally, I'll talk a little bit about our commitment, about what we are willing and to share with others and happy to involve ourselves with others to make sure that we can put a dent in this problem. On the definition slide here, I'm not going to go through each and every one, so don't worry, we're going to get off this slide pretty quick. But here's a framework, right? Because we all talk about illicit trade, but what does it mean, right? So in the alcohol business, what does it mean when we talk about this? If you take a look here, there's one column right on the left. Well, there's a distinction between licit and illicit alcohol. And then there's recorded, right? What is being recorded? Where are taxes being paid? How do you know what's out there? But then we take a look at all the different areas that this can be studied, this can be broken into. And we started in about 2011 with Euromonitor International to start to study, what's the data? What's the problem? Like any other problem in business, right? We also like to have, what are the facts, all right? What's the data telling us? We started in 2011. I think there's been about 50 studies since then, most recently in 2018. So we have some data, and we'll share that data with you. When we look at here, I'm going to address the bottom part of that chart. Oftentimes, from a policy-making standpoint, these are the tough ones to address. These are the ones where it's hard, right, to go in and say, what are we going to do about this? So surrogate, tax leaches, artisanal trade, and we'll go into each of these and explain what they are. One important point to know is that not all unrecorded alcohol is illicit. And it depends by country, depends by geography, depends on what the rules are. But we can see that a huge part of it is, in fact, unrecorded and illicit. So we start to take a closer look to what people are familiar with. So here I've just put up some of the categories. And you can see immediately, right, that this comes in different shapes. It comes in different categories and different forms. And the lesson we derive from this is that the solution for each may not be the same. It may be some for one, it may be some for another, there may be a cross overlap for some, but we always need to keep in mind, are the policies that we're putting together, are the actions that we're taking, are they addressing a particular category, and what are the implications for it? I put up a chart here with, up here with lots of words on it, but let me just take you through an easy way that I think about it. For contraband, I just think of it as smuggling. Counterfeit, it's kind of fraud. Artisanal for trade, it's unregulated commerce. It's someone making something, but they're not licensed, they don't have the safety standards, they're not paying taxes. That's what we mean by artisanal for trade. And then surrogate is what we call, it's really dangerous to the health because this is something that is alcohol for commercial purposes, for, let's say, cleaning fluids, for anything that's not fit for consumption for humans, and taking that alcohol and then selling it to humans. So when we start selling it to people, we know that very bad things can happen. It's unregulated, there are serious health consequences, could be blindness, could be death, but it also be sickness as well. So when we think about that, that's the one, right, that we say, wow, if you get it wrong there, you could really have serious consequences. And then, of course, tax leakage, right? And we talk about tax leakage. Let's think about what that really means, right? what happens to that money that the government collects, all right? Where does that go, right? This is what's used to pave the roads, used for infrastructure, used for education. This is money that each and every country deserves, and I'll be very clear. I'm not here to go in to say, lower my taxes, right? What we're talking about is what is smart policy here. And if you do something in connection with tax policy, what might be the unintended consequences? And that's how we start to think about that. But we're not up here to say, I don't want to pay excise tax, right? We pay a lot of excise tax, but we also benefit from that as well, right? As we're often fond of saying, I don't come down from Mars and start selling alcohol to everyone on the earth, right? I live here too, right? My colleagues live here too. They're part of the community. Beer, unlike some products, right, is locally produced for the most part. So we have breweries all around the world. And what that means is we have colleagues in each and every one of those communities. So when we have an impact on surrogate alcohol, when we have an impact on tax leakage, that benefits me and my colleagues, right? Because we live there, right, and we want to be part of the solution to that as well. You know, one of the things when I first saw the SDGs, you know, it immediately sort of a light bulb went off in my head and I said, man, what a great way for me to start organizing what I'm doing at AB InBev, right? So here's a metric, right, that the world has said this is what's important, right? So what I'm working on, does it match up to these things? And I'll tell you what, if it doesn't match up to those things, I tell my team, take a step back, all right? The SDGs, and I'm proud to wear this pin and let people know what it means, is really a way for us to say, have we put our priorities the right way, right? Every day we wake up, where are we going to spend our money? Where are we going to spend our time and attention? I got to tell you, the SDGs are a great way for the corporate affairs team at AB InBev to decide, have we made those decisions the right decisions? And the one I'd really like to call out here is when we talk about illicit trade, you know, we're also talking about the money that is made from illicit trade, right? It's not like it goes into another country's tax coffers. It's not like that money is redistributed from education to roads, right? It's not like that it goes to, oh, it's in healthcare now. It's not going anywhere. It's not going for any of the purposes. What it is doing is oftentimes funneling criminal enterprises, right? So that alone, when I talked about the number of reasons why this is important, that alone is a real big one that is important for all of us. Now let's get a little bit into the data, right? So Euromonitor, about a year and a half ago, did a study. We went into 24 countries, and this is what we found, right? 26% of alcohol was illicit, right? That's on average. And one of the things I'll go over is the differences between different countries, right? So we start to see wide variances between the level of illicit alcohol between one country and the next. And like all studies, right, people can say, oh, it's a little bit higher, it's a little bit lower. Even if it's just directional, wow, that's a big number, right? Just to give a little hint to sort of the differences, in Africa, for the countries that we studied, there was an average of 40% illicit alcohol. In Eastern Europe, it was 27%. And in Latin America, it was 15%. But even in those areas, there's wide discrepancies about what the numbers are. The fiscal loss that we calculated from this is about $3.6 billion every year. That's a number that got my attention, and I'm sure it'll get everyone's attention in the room. In addition, the illicit beverages that consumers drink, they're most likely to be counterfeit and unregistered brands or artisanal beverages that we talked about. So we also tried to determine where, when we have these categories, where's the data? Where are the big ones? Where are the little ones, et cetera? Again, this was a study for 24 countries, Latin America, Africa, and Eastern Europe. As we dive into the data, we start to look at countries like the Dominican Republic, Ecuador, and Peru are all over 20%. Chile, Panama, and Argentina are under 5%. Countries with high levels of illicit alcohol often have cheap illicit products relative to the regulated products. So it's that gap difference that often drives the behavior. The wider the gap, the higher the incentive for someone to go into illicit alcohol. Regulations and enforcement as well are also clearly an important part of what's driving those numbers. The average for Latin America was 15%, but you can see wide variances, right? Dominican Republic at 30%, down to Chile and Argentina, low single digits. By the way, I put up some pictures as well because the one thing we don't lack for is the sheer volume of counterfeit products sort of out there in illicit trade. Here's some of the data that we had for Africa. And of course, these are not every country, right? We didn't do every country in the world. There was sampling out there, so we got a sense of what's the size of the problem. Here you see higher numbers, 40% average for the countries that were studied, ranging from Mozambique at over 70%. South Africa, about 15%, 14.5%. Once we saw the data, we started to drive into, what is the root cause and what are the drivers here? And what do the findings mean for public policy and the harmful consumption of alcohol? Illegal alcohol, right, is the worst form of harmful consumption in this criteria. You can have one drink of illegal alcohol and have serious, immediate health consequences, all right? So this is why it's unregulated, it's potentially more unsafe, and it avoids taxes. Regulations that are very well-intentioned, right, unless we think about what might be the unintended consequences, all right, we need to understand what all the consequences are. And what I would say is, to the extent we think about the sheer size of illicit alcohol in many markets, we should think about what are the policy implications for illicit alcohol when policies are changed. Illicit alcohol is sold outside frameworks controlling safety and taxation, right? So these are just unregulated products. In the worst scenarios, you don't even know what's in the product. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about some case studies, right, about what it is and what projects have we tried to undertake and to see if we can make an impact on this. And what does that mean, right? So what can we do for consumers who have made the choice, right, to go and consume illicit alcohol, sometimes knowingly, sometimes unknowingly, right? What is it that we can do? I think back to prohibition in the U.S., all right, lifted almost 90 years ago, 85 years ago. Today, we measure the level of illicit consumption of alcohol in the U.S. at less than 2%. And I would posit that affordable beer played a role in that illicit alcohol being so low. But there's other things as well, but I think it's one factor. What I'd like to cover now are 3 examples of how illicit alcohol can be tackled and reduced. Illicit alcohol has been tackled by making beer affordable and using local crops and government incentives on excise. Here's a program that has been run in Zambia and Uganda. And what I like about this program is it's simple, it's easy to explain, and you start to look at the impact on stakeholders. The program involves having local farmers taking subsistence crops, folks who are not farming to sell, but farming to eat. Working, and those are oftentimes women, working with the women to say, okay, if you grow more cassava, we will set up a system where you can go get paid for your cassava, and then you can go back and do with that money, take maybe more education, buy something for the house, buy something for the kids. Put yourself in that stream of commerce is a very important element of this. That cassava is then brought together by us, and we brew beer using the cassava. So what we do is we work with the government to say, there's a large amount of illicit alcohol. That illicit alcohol is at a price point that the formal alcohol isn't able to get down to for a variety of reasons, taxation and costs. If we can work with local farmers, produce a cassava beer, and have less excise for this beer than others, we can drive that price down and start to eat into the illicit market. From the consumer standpoint, much better to get an Eagle cassava lager that you know is from a regulated facility, has health inspections, the quality in the bottle, it's sealed, you know what's in it. In addition, for the local government, gets the taxation for that to do with it what governments are doing to help society, make people's lives better. It's a new income stream for them. So when we step back and say what's happening to the stakeholders, we have the small farmers who have gone from subsistence to now getting a cash crop, right? There's a benefit there. In addition, we are getting a benefit because we are now reaching consumers that we didn't before, right? As well as the health and safety benefit of having a quality product that's inspected and the government gets tax revenue for it. That, for me, is a cycle where many of those stakeholders win. And the best thing about it is the beer tastes good, right? So this is not something that we're telling people, oh, you know, do this because you're going to save something or this is helpful. All those things are there, but the reason people go here, the price point is right, the health and safety aspects, they know the quality that's in there. So when we take a look at this, we've done it in Zambia, we've done it in Uganda, and one of the countries we have 8,000 sellers of cassava for us. 8,000, and these are very, very small lots. Typically, they're aggregated by one person, but the farmers go, they sell small lots, we set up a system, and then it's a virtuous cycle, right? Then you go back, they know, wow, I can sell my next crop there, et cetera, and we can keep going. But 8,000 is a number that really starts to have an impact on a variety of people's lives. We asked ourselves, though, is this just a solution for Africa, right? Is this just something that only works in Africa? Is there something particular about Zambia, Uganda that is driving this? And the answer was we didn't think so, right? But you never know until you test it, right? We thought that the same drivers could work in other parts of the world. So what we did was we went to Brazil, and we went to a particular province in Brazil, right, where we now have 5,000 farmers, again, working on a cassava beer, Magnifica. Now, I'm not the marketer, but I like the name, all right? So, you know, this is something that can have that impact again, just like in Zambia. So here is an element where we've taken something, and yes, we had to adopt it. We had to make sure that the farmers in Brazil, right, would adopt to this, how we work with them, needed to have the right community outreach. But this is something that, for us, is a replicable and a process that can be amplified. We always talk about, can we scale something? Can you have success on a street corner in one store? Well, that's great, but what does that mean? Can you take it out to the town, to the city, to the state, to the country, and can you take it multinational? And amplification in these areas is a very important part of it, because you don't just want to make an impact and spend your resources on just one little area. You want something that you can scale. Here's something that we can scale so we can impact more and more farmers, we can impact more governments, and we can impact more consumers to make sure that they have a safe product and something that they can enjoy without worrying about, is this going to harm me? A different example about one of the activities that we've had to drive down illicit trade comes from Colombia. And the Colombian government has been a wonderful partner to be able to say, here's an issue that we have, what are the potential solutions? This is an issue about commercial alcohol coming in, right? Something that should be used for cleaning products, industrial, something that is not set for human consumption. In the chart up here, there's a little machine up there where you can see a big spike up. That's the introduction of a machine that measures alcohol that comes in to see, right, whether or not it's been denatured. And by denatured, it's just a process where you drop something, you drop a chemical into the alcohol, doesn't impact the commercial viability of it, but if you were to drink it, you would spit it out, right? It's something that you put it in so you can't start filling bottles with it. You can't pretend that this commercial alcohol, not made for human consumption, is getting put in a bottle. And that simple process, right, by denaturing that alcohol, was the insight to say, how do we monitor that? And is it a one-time activity? No. It's something that needs to be monitored. There's these field testing kits, and that's what the pictures represent. The introduction of that helped reduce the misuse of this raw ethanol. It's also an example of a successful partnership between industry and government that has an impact on the everyday lives of people. So moving to the who wins. When you reduce illicit alcohol, who's the benefiter? Well, let me start with who loses, right? We know the losers are the smugglers, the counterfeiters, the money launderers, right? And also, whenever you have an illicit trade, there is always an element that you need to be watchful for corruption, right? So any of that loses as well. But consumers and communities, right? You have a product that is a quality product that can be trusted. You also have a local economy that is benefited by the taxes that are collected. You also have for the businesses, right? You have, whether if you're doing cassava, it's not just about the beer brewers, it's also about the whole value chain that goes in there. When we start to take a look at the results, if you can reduce and eliminate illicit alcohol, the winners, right, are those folks, right, who we want to benefit, right? We want to put people who are playing by the rules, consumers who deserve, right, products that are not adulterated, and governments who deserve the proper tax revenue, right, that they should collect on products that are out there. When we take a look, we wish, right, that there was one silver bullet. We wish that there was just one thing I wish I could take cassava growing all around the world and reduce illicit alcohol. That's not the case, right? That applies to fit certain circumstances. But the framework here allows us to think about what will work for counterfeit, what will work for contraband, what works for artisanal for trade, surrogate and tax leakage. There's overlap in there, but again, from a policy perspective, it's always important to make sure we're seeing what the implications are for these different areas. And the data is important because the amount of counterfeit compared to surrogate could be wildly different in two different geographies, two different countries. So it's always important to remember, let's address directly what the issue is. The other thing about these programs that I like is that they're a direct impact. It goes right to the source. If the issue is counterfeit alcohol in a bottle that's causing harm, then the best solution for that is to make sure that the alcohol in those bottles is regulated, it's licensed, and it does not have the impact on health that these illicit products could have. So I talk about what our commitment is, right? We are committed to the SDGs. And again, I'd really like to emphasize to anyone in the private sector really what an eye-opener it was for me to start organizing activities around that. It was a great framework, right? It also really made the lesson to my team that this is something that needs to be done with governments, it needs to be done with other industry players, it needs to be done with NGOs. This is not something that one action is going to solve. You need to do it together. For us, right, we also see this as a responsibility to support the SDGs. And there are certain things that we can do, right, that we can help with. So things like data collection, data analysis. If you think about what we do, right, very much we're involved in a data business about how do we, right, run our business based on the facts that are out there. That's nothing besides data collecting and data analysis. Oftentimes, it's not a matter of getting new data. You know, we've done some pilots for road safety around the world, where it wasn't like we were going in and getting new road safety data to decrease accidents. What we were doing is we were going in and just getting different groups to talk and share the data and put it in a way that the data can talk to each other. So it wasn't like the traffic department didn't have traffic data, right? It wasn't like the road crew department didn't have traffic data. It was all there. It was just a matter of putting it together and drawing the insights from it. And that is I think something that industry can contribute to. We're ready also to co-create a practical toolkit to tackle this. And when I say a toolkit, this is something, again, that industry does. As a multinational company, we're involved in almost all the countries. We sell our products almost everywhere. There's a few that we don't. But in those countries, we are always looking for similar types of insights. What's working here? What's not working here? Why is it working? And is that applicable to something else? And whether you're doing that for marketing, whether you're doing that for supply logistics, or you're doing that for the reduction of illicit trade, it's all the same skill set. And it is something that I think that we, as the private sector, can add to. I'd like to thank everyone for the opportunity to share this, and I look forward to our conversation later.
So, wow, that was terrific. I thought that was very interesting, and I can certainly feel your passion, and I think everyone in the room can too. I find it, I really like the slide that you had where you're talking about the value of the SDGs in organizing your work at your corporation. One of the reasons that we published this report and that we went to the effort of kind of mapping the illicit sectors of illicit trade against the SDGs is because we were hoping that it might be helpful to the governments and help them organize their policy making. And if I can give you an example of that, is SDG 3. So SDG 3 is for good health and well-being. And so what we're encouraging the governments to do is when you're thinking about how you're going to achieve that goal, also be thinking about the negative impacts that illicit trade might have on that goal. But furthermore, be thinking about the interrelated nature of illicit trade. And my example here actually ties my two speakers together, is that toxic illicit alcoholic beverages and medicines with no active ingredient similarly set back progress for governments in achieving SDG 3. So we're trying to encourage governments to think the same way you are at AB InBev. So with that little transition, I want to introduce the next speaker, Stan Barro. He's with Novartis, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about the illicit trade in pharmaceuticals. Now, I think that's really, you're going to find this very interesting because most of us seem to associate the problem with fake pharmaceuticals. But as with alcohol, there are many different types of illicit trade in pharmaceuticals that Stan's going to tell us about, but there's substandard types of pharmaceuticals. There's unlicensed, there's falsified, and there's counterfeit. So we're going to get to listen to Stan, who has been around a lot. He's worked to fight illicit trade in multiple industries with different companies, and now he's with Novartis, and now he's here to share his intelligence with us. So please, Stan.
Thank you very much. There you go. Thank you very much, Jeff, and thank you very much for the opportunity to shed some light on the illicit trade of falsified medicines. As Jeff mentioned, I think, again, to put things into context, it's always useful to relate that to the SDGs as well, just to illustrate some examples. No doubt, the number 3 is probably the most important of all, good health and well-being. The reason is actually quite simple. I mean, I would start perhaps by giving a bit of background and context. So last month, WHO, the World Health Organization, actually published its list of 13 urgent global health challenges that are to be tackled in the next decade if we're to really make progress on this. The number 4 is actually expanding access to medicines. Within this, they actually highlighted that one of the major obstacles to this objective was actually falsified and substandard medicines. This is a very important statement, and this is really important to us, and it gives a bit of context to this presentation. So number 3 is critical. As Jeff mentioned, Falsified medicines is actually a definition from WHO and captures a number of situations. It's actually every medicine that would lie about its source, composition, or identity. So it's a fairly broad scope. So in a sense, you take counterfeits as we know it, not manufactured by legit pharma industry. Counterfeit would fall into that definition. Stolen medicines, they get out of the licit, legitimate supply chain. So they become illicit in nature and they have patient safety impact consequences. They fall into that definition. Tempered medicines whereby criminal organization would change some data on the packaging. For instance, they would extend the expiry date of the medicines and put them back on the market. They fall into that definition. Illegal diversion does as well. So as you can see, it's a fairly holistic approach of falsified medicines, and I thought that would be important for me to clarify that because I will keep referring to this throughout my presentation. So that's what we are up against. And the impact in relation to the SDG number 3 is absolutely significant. I'll elaborate on this. But needless to say, the vast majority of the cases we're working on have a serious impact on patients, serious harm or leading to death, and I'll tell you exactly why. Number 8, number 9, I could tie them together again because I know you've heard a lot since yesterday about examples in relation to the SDGs impact. But it goes without saying, obviously, that this criminal activity, this illicit trade for falsified medicines, impacts innovation, impacts research, impacts job as well. That's definitely a given. There's been lots of statistics, studies on the topic, and we definitely take it for granted. It's obviously a loss in taxes and revenues for governments, but I think John said it fairly extensively, so I will not elaborate further on this one. Although I was quite interested perhaps to emphasize a bit more about the reduced inequalities, which is the SDG number 10. It's quite interesting for falsified medicines. It is truly a global health issue, the problem of falsified medicines. It is, and I'll show you some examples. We had incidents in over 100 countries, so pretty much everywhere where we could look for, we found falsified medicines. So this is global. But there is no doubt that low-middle-income countries are particularly severely impacted by the issue of falsified medicines. And that drives inequality. In Africa, in Southeast Asia, in Latin America, there are much higher levels of falsified medicines compared to developed countries. We know that. There's been lots of studies. I could mention a number of them. Recently, perhaps one of the latest, a PwC study that identified in some regions in Africa, the level of falsified medicines was up to 70%. I don't think we need to comment that further. It's absolutely enormous, and we have case after case. In recent news, Africa has been really in the news lately for issues in relation to falsified medicines. Responsible consumption and production. John, again, I think showed very shocking pictures on that, notably showed one that drew my attention in relation to the destruction of counterfeit bottles of alcohol or illicit, whatever they were exactly. There are the same issues for every single industry. The pharmaceutical sector is no exception. And it's totally insane. We destroy hundreds of tons every year of falsified medicines produced illicitly. You have here an example in the middle of Benin, 118 tons being destroyed by the authorities. The Ivory Coast just reported that destroyed 385 tons of illicit medicines, falsified, substandard, for just the years of 2017 and 18. I could go on and on. I have examples for every single country. It's absolutely alarming, the volumes and the impact on this particular responsible consumption and production objective. On the number 16, again, we touched on this. There is one thing that makes no doubt. We are up against organized crime. Day in, day out, given the scale, the depth, the magnitude really of the impact here. If I were just to give, again, a recent example, this is Operation Veribus from Europol, focusing on falsified medicines. And as part of this just one operation, they dismantled 17 organized criminal groups. There would be plenty of different operations we could highlight. We have colleagues here from WTO. We work also with Interpol. I mean, again, there are many, many examples like this. And this brings us all back to organized crime. And that truly hinders our objective for peace, justice, and strong institutions. That's certain, and we did touch on corruption. So let me now emphasize some of the trends in the pharmaceutical crime sector, if I could put it that way, because it's a very complex area. I did mention to you the categories under falsified, again, theft, tampered, counterfeits, illegal diversion, but it goes even beyond. It becomes more complex for all of us, the public and the private sector, to actually detect what is illicit. The first one, probably the most alarming one, is what I call mixed genuine counterfeit products. What they are is actually genuine secondary packaging, the actual box, on inside criminal organization would put counterfeit medicines. This is very alarming. This makes detection a lot more difficult and challenging for everyone. And obviously, that has an impact on patients immediately. We believe this is particularly fueled also by theft, which is another big problem we have in the sector. Theft in the private sector, in all respective supply chains. We have cases throughout the pharma industry of theft. I'll spare you the mapping, but it happens all over the world. There are lots of issues in Latin America, in the Middle East and all, but it's a sort of a global phenomenon. But there is also a big activity on public sector theft as well, where the level of security sometimes in the premises they have in certain countries are not as high as they should, and there are regular occasions of theft. And then criminal organizations would mix counterfeit products with genuine products being stolen and put both of them back in the market as well, and they would multiply the profits as well. So highly lucrative activity. The third one in the middle, it's a bit of a catchphrase really to describe a very worrying phenomenon as well. So medicines, as you know, you would all expect to have in a medicine an active ingredient for you to get cured for whatever disease or illness you have. So counterfeiters would offer you the options, especially in India, as we have noticed, but we've seen that as well in China, to offer you a counterfeit drug where there would be no active ingredient, a certain small level of active ingredient, or something definitely higher that would try to get closer to the actual genuine medicines. Why would they do that? Certainly not for patient safety consideration, just to avoid detection. Depending on the intended markets, especially in more highly regulated markets, could say the US or Europe, there are detections as well on the import level. And they would detect if at least there is active ingredient. That would not necessarily detect the level, but at least they would detect active ingredient. So that's the option you would have from the outset. For low middle income countries, they wouldn't care less, and there would be no active ingredient, which is the majority of cases we have observed. Off-label use, a very concerning category as well. This would basically focus or on categories of people who are not patients. They would use these medicines for recreational use. So we're talking about human hormone growth, particularly attractive for bodybuilders. We're talking about attention deficit disorder medicines, also very attractive for young students preparing their exams or professionals under a lot of pressure, or opioids as well for drug addicts. Nonetheless, I mean, they are not patients, but nonetheless, this off-label use practice is very dangerous because it's a blessing for counterfeiters on organized crime altogether, because all these non-patients but still consumers are seeking for these actual medicines, especially on the internet. As I'm sure you all know, as professional as you are, internet is of probably your priority number one when it comes to concerns for falsified medicines. And then lately, just to conclude on this one, we've seen also a growing number of breaches in the legitimate supply chain with falsified medicines reaching patients at pharmacy level, in clinics as well, on hospitals. The impact is everywhere, is global, but is very diverse as well. So here is just to give you an idea that for us, as we have learned over the last few years, there is just not one single product being globally impacted. It's just regional or country specificities. We have big highlights in Africa, obviously for antimalarials, specificities in oncology in India, for instance, and Latin America. Hormone growth we see in more developed markets for the reasons I described to you earlier on. Cardiovascular, we had also significant issues in China, for instance. So data is critical for us to understand how we're impacted by a criminal organization, and that's what we've been working on in the last few years. We've also been working on a methodology to measure the impact on patients. We believe that was really important to understand better how patients were impacted by these falsified medicines. We wanted some clear facts in relation to this. So we developed a methodology, a simple one, level 1 to 3, level 3 being the highest level of impact you could have on a patient, serious harm or death, or one leading to the other depending on the circumstances. Over the last 3 years, over 90% of all the cases we had the chance to test in laboratory environment showed a clear level 3, so the highest impact possible on patients. Why is that? Because below, you see at the bottom of this slide is what we found in these products. You find heavy metals, you find poisons, you find chemicals, you find non-declared APIs, which is very worrying as well. So sometimes you find no API at all, and sometimes you just find the incorrect API. I'll give you a very clear example for an anti-malarial product we have. We found sildenafil, which you would find in Viagra, for instance. So nothing to do with the cure of malaria, and yet that's something we found consistently in a number of cases over and over in Africa. That would be even worse for patients than no API at all, to be honest with you. And then non-declared excipients as well. So that's pretty much everything we found test after test over the last 3 years. Then we worked on a patient projections of everything that was seized over the last 3 years by law enforcement on cases we worked on with them, in collaboration with them. In patients' projection from what we seized, 1.2 million patients. We're talking about treatments, not even just pill individualized. And we know what we seized, just for falsified medicines version of our products, is just the tip of the iceberg. And we know for the industry there are much bigger concerns as well. So what are we doing internally to tackle the issue? I mean, first of all, I believe we're giving it the level of attention it deserves, an important one. The program is strongly embedded into the governance of the company in several ways. First of all, the program we have combating falsified medicines is part of our annual reporting. It's a public report. There are 2 versions of our corporate report. One is a financial one, and one is focusing on corporate responsibility, and the program is part of that. Last week, we released a 2019 report, and if you are interested, I invite you to read it on page 42, and you will learn a bit more about the program and what it is we are doing to tackle this. We also have a public position paper available on the Novartis website to say exactly what is our pledge in relation to falsified medicines and what we believe is our role in this public-private partnership. We have also included the risk of counterfeiting in the risk strategy of the company. This is one of the 3 identified emerging risks, and with that come accountability on risk mitigation measures. So we're accountable to this, and we're open about this as well in our communication, and that's absolutely great. We also have a steering committee, which is the highest body for the governance of the program. And within this steering committee, which is composed of 15 functions, we have 5 members of the Novartis Executive Committee, so the highest leadership positions we have in the company as well. So that's absolutely critical for us. On latest, actually, over the summer, we also had a chance to brief our board risk committee, actually, on the progress of our program and our efforts on this. And I think this effort on governance, on commitment to the public, but also internally, is really important for us to make progress. We also have working groups, a lot more operational in nature, supported by 15 functions across Novartis. Manufacturing, quality, pharmacovigilance, public affairs, legal communications, and more, helping us day in, day out. I'm from the global security function, by the way. Day in, day out to make progress on this with specific objective for all of them. We have a global anti-counterfeiting working group, and we have launched regional ones to accelerate the delivery of the strategy. We already did that in China and in Africa, and now we're about to launch the Indian subcontinent and the Americas as well. And this is really critical to have a global footprint and accelerate. We're also very committed on intelligence, which is one of the 4 operational pillars we have for this program. Intelligence is key. We need information, we need intelligence, we need to be able to share it with law enforcement and health authorities. So we put a huge amount of effort on this intelligence mission, both online and offline as well. Online, we have an online monitoring program focusing on online pharmacies, commercial platforms, social media. We're also part of a joint industry initiative under the Pharmaceutical Security Institute umbrella. So about 10 pharma industries gather to disrupt the activities of rogue online pharmacies. Offline by conducting regular market surveys as well. And I here show a list of just a few of the countries where we conducted market surveys in recent months. There are many more as well. And this is critical. Enforcement, to be clear again, but everybody knows this here, I have no doubt, we do not carry enforcement. We're just a private sector, but we work alongside law enforcement and health authorities in the countries for enforcement to be carried out. So we're their partner in helping them being successful on this enterprise as well. So as I said, we do collect intelligence, we share it with them, we file complaints, we follow up on this. We do everything we can to help them also with authentication of falsified medicines for them to be successful. And it's a shared success. Cases, as I said, we had them everywhere, so I won't drill on this. I show here cases in Colombia, Italy, Cameroon, India. I could share examples in 97 other countries and more, I'm sure. So I don't think really that's a point here. I would just summarize this by saying for all these cases, this is organized crime. These are just not individual operating just like that out of their basement. We're talking about organized crime, large scale. We're talking about organized crime mixing things up, where we have cases like in Colombia where they had counterfeit, tampered and stolen medicines being seized in their premises, so whatever they can make money with. And then for all these cases, again, no API or just dramatic patient safety impact, and that's a thing we need to remember when we're after these organized crime groups. Prevention, absolutely critical. Detection for falsified medicines is the biggest challenge we have. So we have equipped ourselves with technology. First, to detect counterfeit secondary packaging. We have security features on our products, and we have these scanners you see at the top, we call Prove, to detect whether these products have or not the security features. And we're in the process of moving to mobile-enabled technology. Then for the actual drugs, solids or liquids, we have mobile laboratories, which you see in the middle, which we call spectrometric toolkits. 3 pieces of fancy technology that we have deployed in the regions as well to help us analyze the tablets and the liquids whenever we detect suspect samples. And finally, a project we're quite excited about. It's a pilot, which I'm sharing with you, called Authentifil by Novartis, which is a small mobile cloud-enabled technology, cost-effective as well, spectrometric sensors, which is meant to be the future of the technology you see in the middle, that would give us a chance to be deployable in every single country where we operate and accelerate the detection of falsified medicines. It takes time, it's a pilot, but we're very excited about it because that would solve one of our biggest challenges, is timely detection and escalation of these incidents to authorities. And that's our footprint. As you can see, it's quite significant just for detection. We have 3 global labs for forensic laboratory analysis for the full in-depth investigation for cases going to courts and all. We have 3 mobile laboratories deployed in the Americas, in EMEA, and in Asia as well, that can travel to go to places to support authorities whenever needed. We have 248 verifiers for the secondary packaging I described to you, operational as we speak. And now we've just deployed 50 of these new Authentifil by Novartis sensors in low-middle income countries, particular focus in Africa right now, to test in the field how this is performing with us for the objective to have them deployed in every single country where we operate. It's a massive investment, just for you to understand the complexity of what we have to go through to detect falsified medicines. But this is critical. Without this, we could not operate at all. And finally, to conclude on my presentation, we believe stakeholder engagement is an absolute critical piece of the success in effectively combating falsified medicines. For us, there are 3 pillars in this pledge. Public awareness, first of all. we do believe in public awareness, especially for falsified medicines. We're engaged into 2 campaigns, one called Unreal, focusing on young consumers, teenagers, especially buying online. And I mentioned to you about the problem with hormone growth or attention deficit disorder. This is particularly targeting young people, so we're committed to that. And the other one is Fight the Fakes. It's a global campaign focusing on falsified medicines, covering the whole spectrum as well. This is absolutely critical, and we're committed to that part. Second one is capacity building. On this one is different from awareness. Capacity building is focusing on law enforcement and health authorities for one purpose, helping them doing their job. We share intelligence, information, we train them, and that's really critical, and we mean to improve on this because it's honestly difficult to operate in every single country and help authorities, and I think this is why this forum is here, for that, to find solutions to be more effective on that front. And then policy and advocacy again, and that touches what we're discussing here, to engage with key stakeholders where we believe we can progress on our policy and advocacy agenda, stricter regulations, really having frameworks to really tackle illicit trade more effectively. And I think we have a lot of work to do on that front, as we can all appreciate, and that has been the discussion over the last 2 days. We are very committed to this. And I would conclude by thanking you again for the opportunity for us to share this insight in relation to falsified medicines. Thank you.
Thank you, Stan. First, just for the record, he mentioned, he had a slide where he mentioned some corporate statements and information from Novartis. Those can also be found on the UNCTAD website for this event in the section on background documents. And actually, I think for the record, most of, if not all, the presentations are available there online. But back to Stan's presentation. I mean, I don't know about you, but I had a roller coaster of emotions during your presentation. And as much as I've already heard about illicit trade in pharmaceuticals, I can't help but being shocked and outraged every time I see the presentation of what's going on out there. I mean, it seems to me almost unbelievable that an industry that exists to produce products to help people is up against an illegal version of that industry where people are hurt by the product. And it's intolerable. And it's another reason why we're here, because it demonstrates that we have to make some change out there. The other part, though, the roller coaster, is I've ceased to be impressed with the work that your company is doing, and I know others in this sector are doing, the steps that you're taking to try to protect your consumers from these, these false products. So keep up the good work.